A.T. Carney called Sri Lanka's IT BPO industry a hidden gem. They call Sri Lanka, in fact, a hidden gem for outsourcing, uniquely positioned to offer highly skilled talent to the world. And if you see our track record, some of the biggest brand names in the world, including HSBC, R.R. Donnelley, WNS, IFS, they have their centers in Sri Lanka or they have work outsourced to Sri Lanka.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for everyone joining us here today on the very first episode of the Infomate podcast. And joining me on this episode is the CEO of Infomate, Jehan Perin Banayagam. Thank you, Jehan, for joining us on this episode. Jehan, can we begin by educating our audience on the importance of the IT BPO sector to the economy of Sri Lanka?
Sure, thank you very much. I've been proud to be associated with the IT BPM industry for nearly 2 decades. And it's an industry that has been very, very exciting and very fulfilling at the same time. So the industry is a key one within the Sri Lankan economy. It's one of the top 5 export industries in the country. And when you think that it was just over a very short period that we've been able to achieve this, you get an idea of the promise and huge potential of this industry. Just a month ago, the Export Development Board released statistics and ranked Sri Lanka 3rd in terms of export revenue earnings. The conservative estimate for 2022 was $1.8 billion. And the goals of the industry is by 2025 to be $5 billion in export revenue earnings, to employ 200,000 workforce and to have 1,000 startups. So SLASCOM, which is the Industry Association for IT BPM companies, has been championing this whole drive, working closely with private sector and with public sector, with academia, and working on developing the brand Sri Lanka. It's called IOI, Island of Ingenuity. And the current statistics are $1.8 billion in export revenue earnings, an employment of close to 120,000 people. And also a notable factor is the diversity. So across the industry, it's about 36-37% female representation in the workforce, including in some of the highest levels. We had our former chair of SLASCOM was Sandra De Souza, who was the first female chair. And it's also an inclusive industry. We're looking at expanding our centers across the island, not just in the Western province, and also championing ESG, environment, social, and governance aspects. So it's a responsible industry, and it's a key industry contributing vital export revenue earnings to the Sri Lankan economy.
Understood, Jehan. So these are, you were talking about the 2025 goals for the industry, and those seem to be very ambitious goals, Jehan. However, in order to achieve those goals, it's important that you all continue to win over the trust of your current clients as well as future clients. From what I've heard and from what I've researched, Sri Lankan service companies have a very good reputation overseas. What is so special about the Sri Lankan services companies? What are some of those unique attributes of the Sri Lankan service companies?
Absolutely. So A.T. Carney called Sri Lanka's IT BPM industry a hidden gem. They call Sri Lanka, in fact, a hidden gem for outsourcing, uniquely positioned to offer highly skilled talent to the world. And if you see our track record, some of the biggest brand names in the world, including HSBC, R.R. Donnelley, WNS, IFS, they have their centers in Sri Lanka or they have work outsourced to Sri Lanka. It's called a hidden gem because perhaps we've not done a great job in telling this story and articulating the myriad things that we've achieved. But the world has taken notice. And Sri Lanka is called a center of excellence for accounting. We have one of the highest pools of UK qualified accountants in the world. So we have a lot to offer the world in terms of highly skilled talent, in terms of reliability, in terms of resilience and robustness, and in terms of innovation. So if you look at multiple ranking bodies, A.T. Carney, Tholons, and IBM, and several others have ranked Sri Lanka very favorably. So you have our talent, you have the innovation, and in terms of price, 2019 A.T. Carney report ranked Sri Lanka first in terms of financial attractiveness. So from every aspect, we have a lot to offer.
Jehan, what was interesting was you mentioned that Sri Lanka has been called a hidden gem in the services industry. And perhaps one of the reasons for that is when we say services industries and BPOs and IT companies, some of the names, the countries that come to our mind are India, Philippines, which have a massive population. Sri Lanka, of course, doesn't have such a population. So it was very interesting when you said that Sri Lanka is actually price competitive compared to these larger markets. But I think what's also equally important is Sri Lanka's knowledge and the IP that we have. That really gives us an edge over some of the competitors. Wouldn't you agree?
No, absolutely. So I think we have to pick our markets and our services carefully. For instance, India and Philippines are very, very good when it comes to the high volume activities like large scale call centers and contact centers. And if we are wise, we are not going to compete in those spaces. The idea, in fact, I would suggest post-pandemic, it's not competition, it's collaboration. And we've had several Indian companies coming and looking at Sri Lanka for their second centers. We've had Philippine companies, we had the Emapta, which is about 3,000 people in Philippines coming and setting up in Sri Lanka. Their goal is to reach 300, and I think they've already reached 270. This was during the pandemic because they realized it's no longer about competition, it's about leveraging the different strengths of each individual region, each individual delivery center. And they also understood it's important to have a second center, because there is a need to mitigate risks. You can't have all your eggs in one basket. So I think there is a great opportunity for us to collaborate with the large Indian players, have their second center in Sri Lanka. And also leverage Sri Lanka for its unique skill sets. And that's exactly what Emapta said, because they said they had some resourcing challenges when it came to F&A, Finance and Accounting BPO, when it came to RPA resources. And those are areas that we are strong in. So why not collaborate, right? So I think it's a matter of not competing, but leveraging our unique strengths. So I think if you look at areas like finance and accounting, outsourcing, right? If you look at product development when it comes to IP, you mentioned about IP. Right? You have product companies like WSO2, which are world famous. I think they have come up with fantastic products, which are renowned across the world. And there are so many other case studies. So it is, to repeat myself, leveraging Sri Lanka's unique skill set and unique positioning. And also, if you look at the SME type projects, which are 50 to 100 to 200 seats, maybe you won't get the same attention, the same senior management involvement if you are looking at some of the big BPO delivery centers. But in Sri Lanka, you will get that. And so if you look at what is unique and why some of these big companies and big brand names have set up in Sri Lanka, the most recent being Ernst & Young GDS, Global Delivery Center. In the height of the pandemic, with all of these economic challenges that we had, they decided, let us set up in Sri Lanka. You had HCL coming and setting up and growing from 0 to 1,000 in 1 year, and their goal is to reach 5,000. Now, why have all of these people come and set up in Sri Lanka? There's a reason. So I think it's the talent, it's the mindset, the service mindset that is there in Sri Lanka. I think if you look at our tourism industry, we pride ourselves in our hospitality, in our warmth, in terms of building lifelong friendships and partnerships, and that is something I think that is really valued by our clients globally. They really value the relationship aspect, and also we will not overcommit and underdeliver. Right? We will not overpromise, market something and not deliver. You'll find that it's more what we say we can do is what we actually deliver. So to summarize, what I think is unique about us is our talent, our commitment to delivery, the lifelong relationships and partnerships, and the robustness and the resilience of Sri Lanka's delivery. Throughout the pandemic, throughout the recent economic challenges, we did not drop, there was not a heartbeat drop in terms of service delivery. We were able to very quickly pivot to remote working, and all of our BCP measures stood the test, and we were able to come through with flying colors.
Speaks a lot about the resilience of the Sri Lankan people. We've been thrown a lot of challenges our way, but we've somehow managed to survive. And what you were saying about the hospitality industry and Sri Lankans being hospitable by nature, and that's spilling into the services industry and giving us a unique edge was something that has never occurred to me. So thank you for educating me on this. Now, you were talking, Jahan, just a few minutes ago, how Indian officers or Indian companies are setting up a second office in Colombo and in other parts of Sri Lanka. But what we also noticed during the crisis was a couple of our service companies in Sri Lanka setting up shop in other places as well, like UAE and the Gulf, for example. What is your take on that, and how has John Keells Group, taken on that challenge of diversifying the risk factor?
As you said, there was a necessity to assure our customers, and that was part of the business continuity planning. But most of these companies that I mentioned, all of them have made a commitment to Sri Lanka, even amidst all of what has gone on, and a lot of them intend to expand. So it is a short-term measure to diversify risk, to mitigate some of the risks and give that added measure of assurance to their customers. But a term that we have coined in SLASCOM, which one of our former chairs shared, is commitment to Sri Lanka. And all of us are committed to Sri Lanka, and IFS at the most senior leadership level, they came out and made a very public statement saying that they are absolutely committed to Sri Lanka and they want to continue to grow here. The London Stock Exchange, for instance. So yes, there was a measure of risk mitigation that happened, but our long-term commitment is to growing Sri Lanka.
Understood. So that is some encouraging words from you, representing, of course, both your company as well as SLASCOM, because we badly need foreign exchange and business happening within the country. Can you elaborate a bit more on the role the IT BPO sector would play in the the recovery of the Sri Lankan economy going forward?
So we are closely engaged in working with all the stakeholders, both public and private. So we work very closely with different branches of government, with Export Development Board, Board of Investment. Our chairman Ashik was in fact even in the subcommittee of multiple areas, including the central bank. So our chairman Ashik was in the subcommittee of the central bank, and we are working very closely with academia, with UGC and with several government and private universities to make sure that we have the talent to fulfill our growth aspirations. So I think if we achieve our $5 billion export revenue target, we will be one of the significant contributors. And an important aspect is a lot of this, or most of this $5 billion is retained in Sri Lanka. The value addition component is very, very high, and the amount that we actually pay out in terms of licenses and all is negligible. Right? And if you look at some of the other industries, whilst the pure export revenue earnings are high, there's also a fairly substantial outflow. IT BPM industry, the retention within the country is very high. Right? Also, as I said, there is a huge opportunity to employ people across the island. Right? And we are today, my company is looking at setting up operations in different regions. We already have 3 centers in different parts of Sri Lanka, and that is seen in other member companies as well. There is a huge potential to employ people from different backgrounds, including women who are returning into the workforce. We call it the returnship program. Employ differently able people, enable people working from home. All of these opportunities are key for the recovery of Sri Lanka's economy.
Yeah.
Right? And also, if you look at in terms of the branding, when you have players like London Stock Exchange, HSBC having their delivery centers out of Sri Lanka, I think that's a huge vote of confidence in the Sri Lankan talent, in the Sri Lankan people, in the Sri Lankan economy, in the Sri Lankan story. Right? So from every aspect of branding, employment creation, exports, value addition, in terms of having people, white collar jobs, of high paying jobs, employing people who can't otherwise travel to work, in each of these areas, it's a key contributor.
Right, perfect. So now that we've addressed some of the macro factors, let's get into Infomate in particular. Infomate has always been a company that has been a socially conscious player, who's always engaged in CSR and other activities to positively contribute towards the greater society at large. What has been the role of Infomate and also John Keells Group in particular towards the recovery of Sri Lanka?
So a little bit about the Infomate story. We were set up 18 years ago as a shared services center for the John Keells Group. Right? So our initial mandate was to serve the JKH subsidiaries. We had 60 people, and we were doing finance and accounting work. Later we added payroll, but we had bigger aspirations. Right? We wanted to be a key player both within the John Keells Group, and we wanted to be number one in the BPM industry. So we had lofty aspirations. It took us some time. It took a lot of hard work. But today where we sit is we are the sixth, or we are among the top 6 export contributors in the BPMs of all BPMs in Sri Lanka. We employ about 400 people. We serve some very big brand names in different parts of the world. We have about 60% female representation in our workforce. We were the first to pioneer the concept of rural BPO. So we have made great progress, but I think the best is yet to come. We have a much bigger aspirations and many more plans to achieve. So coming to your question of CSR and making a difference, I think that is something the John Keells Group has always championed. They have championed things like sustainability long time ago. They have championed equal opportunity, values, and leading by example. So that is something that we've taken in and we've drawn from our parent company. And Infomate has also forged its own identity as a responsible player. So right from the beginning, we had this dream that we didn't want to be just another company. We wanted to make a difference. And today that is seen in groundbreaking rural BPO project. Today 50% of the John Keells accounting work on SAP happens in 3 regions of Sri Lanka. Farming village of Mahavilachya, tsunami affected Sinigama, and the formerly war affected Jaffna. We have over 200 boys and girls who have gone through this, and many of them have gone on to get good government and private sector jobs. We've even able to work with rehabilities, and I spoke to one of them yesterday. It's very gratifying to see the impact that this project has had on lives. We also want to lead in the area of ESG. So that is something that we have started relatively recently. Just last year we planted over 1,000 trees. We are measuring our carbon footprint. We want to be carbon neutral by 2025, and we have a huge drive on employee physical and mental health. That is something that took prominence during the pandemic period, and we realized that we want our workforce to be healthy, body, mind, and spirit. Another aspect that I'm very proud of is that we've employed over probably several thousand people in Infomate over the 18 years, and a lot of them have gone on to get top level positions in the finance function and in other activities, both in John Keells and overseas and in other companies of Sri Lanka. So we were able to launch, I think, many careers from Infomate. So whether it's for our employees, for the community, for the economy, and for the country at large, I think we've made a difference, and we want to continue to do that.
Excellent. That's exactly what Sri Lanka needs at a time like this, Jihan. Sri Lanka has had a pretty tough time for the last couple of years. We've had so many challenges thrown our way. What is your personal take on our situation, and how optimistic are you towards the future of our country?
As you said, we went through a very tough time, but I've always said bad times don't last. The good times will come. These are cycles that have happened in different parts of the world. And speaking to several people, including listening to our chairman, Krishan Balendra, who's always been very positive, and I've seen my leadership at JKH, they've always taken a long-term view and have had confidence in Sri Lanka. My industry colleagues also were able to very quickly implement a series of measures to ensure the reliability of our service levels, and they have continued to be optimistic. I've asked several business people, have listened to several economists, and all of them have reiterated, even in the worst of times, that we were not going down the route of Venezuela or Zimbabwe. They absolutely had confidence. Yes, there were certain things that we should have done differently, but the fundamentals of Sri Lanka's economy, its huge pool of talent, the lot of natural resources that we had, our unique positioning geographically, was something that would ensure that we don't go down that route, that we would bounce back. And I think what we are seeing today is really validating that belief. We are seeing Sri Lanka bounce back very strongly. And if you see today, countries around the world have challenges, right? I think the UK has its challenges, Australia, the US has its challenges, they're looking at global recessions. So it's not unique to Sri Lanka. And I think what we will see is Sri Lanka bounce back faster than everyone expected. And some of the long postponed structural changes will now get accelerated because of this crisis. So as they say, don't waste a crisis. So we were able to do certain things, for instance, restructure our state-owned enterprises, reform our tax system. Now these are things that are going to stand us in good stead. These were things that were politically difficult to do, but now because of the crisis, I think everyone came together, they saw what had to be done, and now we are seeing it getting done. So Sri Lanka has much to offer the world. We have, I think, some of the best talent. In other areas, tourism, it was Destination of the Year of Lonely Planet in 2019. We have some of the best spices in the world. We have an abundance of water. If you look at our geographical positioning, uniquely positioned for shipping, to be a shipping hub, to be a knowledge hub. Some of the other things that we have, the gemstones, right? I think some of the best gemstones in the world, some of the best tea in the world, biodiversity hotspot. Possibly we have reserves of gas and so many other renewable energy. Absolutely. So we have much to offer the world. And we just need to harness it. We need to work together. We need to believe. We need to be positive. So something that I would like to recommend to all the young people watching this is positivity. Never let your shoulders drop. Continue to believe. Continue to have faith in Sri Lanka. We will come through, and we will come through strong.
As a young Sri Lankan, Jehan, listening to your message definitely gives me a lot of reassurance and optimism and hope towards the future. Ladies and gentlemen, this was the first episode of the Infomate podcast. On the second episode of the Infomate podcast, we're going to learn more about the story of Infomate, which Jehan did touch in the first episode. So we are really looking forward to catching you all on the second episode of the Infomate podcast, and thanking Jehan in the meantime for joining us in this episode and educating us on the current situation of the country, on what we can expect going forward into the future. Speak to you all soon.
Thank you very much.